And then I'll do the share content thing. No, not share content. That's not what I want. I want to spotlight me so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to see if we can do this fairly quick because I'm going to try and tie 3 different types of wing on 3 different styles of fly. So somebody had mentioned that they had, in one of these sessions, that they had issues with tying parachute flies or issues with the parachutes anyway. So I'm going to show you 3 different kinds of material for tying the parachute wing. And I'll do that on 3 different types of fly just to give you an idea of how different things work. The first one is the venerable old Royal Coachman dry fly, but typically it would have been a split wing with a vertical hackle. So parachute style is a little different. Now, I'm not varying too much from the pattern because I'm going to use this stuff for the parachute wing, which is calf tail. And that's one of the more difficult materials to tie a parachute wing with. So first off, the hook is I'm tying this in a size 10 again so that you guys can see a little better. It's a size 10 dry fly hook. Get this in the vise. This one is a Hackle dry fly. So it's a barbless and it's got a slightly bent up point. So it hopefully will hook a little better than a typical barbless. Now, I'm going to use 8/0 black thread for this. I start right behind the eye and I will cover, come on, now my bobbin is kind of seized up here. Sort of like my Shaw email. I'm going to cover the hook shank back halfway down the shank. Trim the butt of that. Then I'll bring the thread back up to the 1/4 point and let it hang there. Then I need to prepare the calf tail. And the trick with the calf tail is to pick some fibers that are relatively all the same length. And I'm going to cut a clump of calf tail off of there that's roughly gap width. Cut it off right down at the base of the calf tail. Now, this is the key point with calf tail, is you hold the tips in your left hand and you pull all the fuzz out of the bottom. You see, it reduces the amount of calf tail substantially. So you end up with a much smaller wing. The other reason for doing that is that without the fuzzy at the bottom, the material will crush down on the hook a lot better. I put this in my Heritage stacker. This is this was actually owned by Roman Sherabin, and I managed to pick it up at his estate sale when he passed away. So I always think of Roman when I use this thing. And I'll table here, even the tips up. Their stacker side. I want the wing, you see now the tips are relatively even, and it's not a huge clump. I want the height of the wing to be roughly the length of the hook from the shank, the eye, down to where the shank starts to bend. So I'll hold that in my left hand, pinched at that point, bring it up, set it down on the thread, and do a pinch wrap over the top, There we go. It's not going there. Okay, there we go. So that it's right at that 1/4 inch quarter point. And I'll hold it steady enough that it's not going to wrap around the shank. Adjust the length a little bit. It came up a little short. Let's try that again. There we go. A couple of good wraps. Then I want to pull the hair up and back and do a couple of wraps in front, just to keep it out of the way. Cinch it down good at the back. Take my scissors and, oh, that did not work. I think what's happening here is that didn't get enough thread on the shank. Let's try that again. Yeah, if I don't have enough thread on the shank here, what'll happen is it will spin around the shank of the hook. So now I got a good bed of thread. And I'll do it again. Measure them up. Put them on the shank. That's better. Yeah, it must have been right on a bare spot on the shank. And a little wrap, a couple of wraps in front just to make it stand up a bit. Then I come in and cut at an angle the butts. And bind the butts down good and solid. This makes a little, because it's at an angle, it makes a little bit of a transition between where the thorax is and where the body of the fly is. Now I'll come in front and I'll build a really good thread dam right in front of that wing to make it stand up vertically as best I can. Then to make sure it's going to be up, I go around the hair gently, not too hard. Now this, because it's calf tail, it's fairly stiff and you can get a bit of tension on the thread without it flopping over. I get a bit of a post. So now I've got a straight up wing that is got this post on it that's a little bit of thread that stiffens it up a bit. And that's important when we get later to wrap the hackle. Bring my thread right down to the bend. Traditional tails for these guys is golden pheasant crest. And I'm just going to use a few strands of it, probably 5 or 6. Pull it off the stem. And I want, again, about shank length. So you see where that second piece of black is. Just in front of that second piece of black is where I'm going to tie it onto the shank of the hook. So I have that little bit of black right at the end of the body. And I'll wrap up to, again, just where that calf tail ends on the shank of the hook. And I'll trim that off, the butts off. Makes a little bit of a smooth transition between the two. Bring my thread back to the back. And I have, for the body, is Peacock Herl. And I got 2 strands. I'll trim it off one short. About 1/8 of an inch past the end of my fingers. Set it down on the hook and wrap that in. Again, take that right back to where the tail's tied on. Bring my thread up midpoint on the shank, and I will wrap a Peacock Herl ball at the end of the hook. This is pretty fine Peacock Herl. And I'll try to give it the 2 strands a bit of a twist, but it's not cooperating. So let's just unwrap that and get it twisted here. There we go. Being ornery today. Doesn't want to go. Come on. There we go. Now I got it. No, I don't. What I'm trying to do is get these 2 to wrap side by side, and they're not cooperating. There we go. Now, close enough. I got this bit of Peacock Herl at the back. There we go. And I'm going to cut that off. Now the magic is this stuff, which is, I showed you earlier, which is the Pearsall's floss. You can use a synthetic floss, but if you're using a synthetic, I would go just slightly darker than this, because this silk floss will get a little bit darker when it's wet. So the actual color of the fly should be like wet silk floss. Tie that down in the middle, bring my thread back to where the hump starts on the fly, on the wing. Just going to do this with my Hackle pliers because this is a short piece of floss. And I'm going to wrap a nice, try to do a nice smooth, even body up the shank here. And I'm going to wrap it up until I get about the same distance behind the wing as the dubbing ball is at the back. And then I'll tie that off. And trim it clear. Back to my Peacock Herl. I have another 2 strands here. Cut it short. I'll lay this down so that it's alongside the hook, extending past where the wing is, because I want to get that stem in there nice and solid. And I'll wrap it down in front of the wing so that it's, the heck is that? There you go. There we go. I'm going to bring my thread back and I'm going to let it hang just behind where the wing is. Hang it on the far side. Again, counter twist this Peacock Herl. There we go. Now it's behaving. I'm going to go a couple or 3 wraps in behind the wing on the front of that body, and then I'll bring it under the wing and I'll wrap in front, giving it a little counterclockwise twist every time. 2 or 3 wraps there, then under the wing again a couple of times, and in behind the wing I'm going to tie this off on the far side of the hook. Let that hang, slide my scissors down the Herl and snip it off. So now we have to tie the hackle in. And the hackle is simply a standard, you can use a furnace or just a standard medium brown saddle. And I don't need a lot of wraps, but I'm gonna, this one has a fair bit of taper for a saddle. I'm gonna just strip off the, measure the hackle. For these parachute flies, you want the hackle fibers to be more than 1.5 gap width, which you would normally have on a dry fly. You want almost 2, because they stick out to the side and they're a little more buoyant if they have a slightly longer hackle than what you would use for a vertically wrapped hackle. I stripped the fibers back and a little more than 1/8 inch of stem bare. Turn it so that the brightly colored side faces me. I'll bring my thread in front of the wing and put the tip of the hackle in front of the wing. Ow. And this wing is in the way. Just stroke it back out of the way here. There we go. So just catch it, shut the tip just in front of the wing, bring the thread underneath and catch it in behind and bring it around to the far side of the wing and hold and give it a little crimp and hold it straight up. Then I want to wrap, come on, get over there. I want to wrap behind the hackle with my thread Darn it, that pulled out again. This is always the key part, is getting this. Let's extend myself a little more. There we go. A little more tip of the hackle so that I get a good solid wrap in front. And then in behind the hackle. So my thread is wrapped now behind the hackle and it's standing straight up. What I want to do at this point, I want to pull the hackle forward just a hair, give it a little kink so that it sticks straight up beside the wing. Then wrap around the wing. You know, some days you can't win for losing. That hackle stem keeps pulling out. Now, some guys leave a few little barbules out there, but I don't want to do that because they kind of get in the way. There you go. All right. Good solid wrap this time. All right. I did this several times this week, so wrap behind. And then I would take my thread around the wing, over the eye, and around the hackle. And that business of pulling the hackle up is important because it puts a little kink into the hackle where it goes around the wing. And I need to hold wing and the hackle at the same time. Shit. Pardon me, language here, guys. I keep pulling my stem out. And that's unusual. For some reason, this particular hackle does not want to cooperate. Part of it is that I think my wing is a little too sparse. Okay. Get it around there. I'm not making this easy, am I? There you go. Over and around. So what I want to do is wrap this around the hackle stem and the post at the same time. And when I get 4 or 5 wraps, there we go. Now I can let go of the wing and I wrap the hackle over the body of the fly. That's the problem. My wing is just a little too sparse. It's flopping around on me. And I should have been longer as well. So I did have to start with the hard one. Over the eye and pull down, over the body, pull down. And the reason for pulling it down on each side as you wrap it is that makes each subsequent wrap around the post go underneath the previous one. When I get 3 or 4 good wraps, I pull the hackle straight down and I want to take my thread and do the same thing over the eye and down, over the body and down, all around the post. When I get about 3 of these, I let it hang and I will just turn this slightly so I can see it, and I'll slide my scissors down the hackle stem and trim it off on the bottom. And I want to go around the stem just one more time. Now here's the trick to getting your whip finish is I grab that whole thing with my right hand, take the fly out of the vise and make the shank vertical. Now at this point, don't let go of that. You want to hang on to the bobbin because it'll flop the wing over if you don't. And I'll take my whip finisher now and I'll do the same thing I will wrap around the wing, over the body, down, over the eye, and down. So always keeping that thread that's wrapping around the post on the underside of the wing. Push away and keep that hackle plier at your whip finisher end at the bottom of the fly, so you don't trap a whole bunch of hackle fibers when you pull it in. And then just slide your scissors up and saw on that thread and it'll cut it off. So that was a more trouble than I thought was going to be. I did not make a stiff enough wing in that case. I should have had more calf tail. So that's a parachute, well, Coachman. What I'm going to do next is a little easier, I think, wing to tie. The calf tail is harder to tie because it doesn't crunch down really well. So this next fly is going to be using the same hook, which again is a Panic size 10. Back in the vise, horizontal. Same thread, right behind the eye, tied on. Same drill. I want to go get enough of a good solid thread wrap that this wing is not going to twist around like the last one. Halfway down the hook shank. Trim it off. Come back up to the quarter point. Now, the wing on this is turkey flat. And they come like yay. The feather looks like this. It's nice and square at the top. It's nice. These barbules stick together nicely. And I need to prep this feather so that I can get the wing that I want out of it. So I pull all the fuzz off the bottom. So I just have stem. Now the next trick is I need to get in here and take off the tip. And I'm going to leave a little bit of tip there. Just need to pull the barbules back a bit so that I make this little V at the tip. Get in here with my scissors and snip that off. I can discard that. I'm not going to use that to tie the wing. What I'm going to use is the stuff that's on either side of the stem here. So once again, I want the wing material to be about gap. So I'm going to separate out and pull back the barbules on the feather like that. So now I have a V-shaped piece of turkey flat. And I'll come in here and I'll snip this out right there, keep the stem. And I end up with the remaining turkey flat I can use for another fly. And this I have a couple of these that I don't have to do the original tip clip on. Take this this V, and with the wings tips facing to the right, I lay it on top of my finger and fold it so the tips line up. So all the tips are lined up and it's a folded feather now. I will measure that again, the full length of the hook, put it right over top of where my thread is, and cinch him down. A couple of good cinches there. 1, 2. Then I'll lift up again, just like I did with the calf tail. And I'll do several good wraps here because this is a soft material. It'll hold it almost straight up. I'll come in here at the angle I did, just like on the calf tail, and trim it off. Now, because this material crushes way better than calf tail, it doesn't make a bulky body if I leave a little bit for the shank there. And I'll cinch that down really good. Now this stuff, for some reason, I find it easier to post up than I do the calf tail. So I'll build that dam in front so it sits straight up. And then I will go gently around it. And every time I do a wrap, as I tighten the wrap, I'll hold the fibers straight up. So relatively loose around, snug it when I put the wrap up. And I'm going to try and get a good, I'd say 1/8 of an inch up that post. Now, because these turkey flats crush a little when I do that snugging, it makes the post less flopsy than the calf tail one. So now you see we've got a really nice vertical post, and I don't mind it being tall. I think a lot of these parachute flies, if you have a tall wing post, it helps the fly land properly. Now come back down the shaft of the hook, shank of the hook, right to the bend. Now for this one, I'm using a neat material for tail. It's called Coq de Leon. It's got really nice markings on it, speckle markings. I got a feather here that I'm going to take the barbules off of. I pull them, just pull a few off the stem. And you can see there's not a lot there. Again, about shank length. Tie it in right at the back. And again, because this is lightweight material, I can wrap that up the hook shank and it will crush down nice and give me a nice smooth body. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to put when I do the dub body on this, I want a rib on it. So I've got some 3/0 thread. I'll just pull a length of that off the spool and cut it. Fumbleitis today. And I will tie that in on the shank of the hook. And I'll wrap over top of it right back to where I tied in the tail. Because that's a long piece of material, I can put in my material clip back here and it'll hold it out of the way. Okay, body. I'm going to use a very light gray Antron. Just get a small amount of it. And I don't need to put a whole lot on it. I want a fairly skinny body. So I'm going to dub that onto the thread in a small dubbing rope. And this stuff, as you stretch it on, you can tie it on. You can see it's only kind of doubling, maybe tripling the thickness of the thread. And I will start wrapping a thread dubbed body at the back. And as I go forward, I'll start to make it a little bit thicker. I don't want to make a big bulky body too much. I want to try and keep it a little skinny. I want enough dubbing that'll hide the thread color a bit. And then as I get to the thorax, I'll let it get a little bit thicker. And when I get right behind the wing, that's where I'm going to stop dubbing. And I'll take the thread and I counter wrap a spiral rib up the body. You can see that black tying thread makes a nice contrasting rib up the body. Okay, tie off right behind the wing. I really like that thread ribbing technique on these thinly dubbed bodies. It really gives a nice little contrast. Then I'm going to make a thorax on this one, a good contrasty thorax with black dubbing. Now you can use different colors depending on what kind of insect you think you're going to be using it to imitate. Now for the black, I'm going to dub it on a little thicker because I want a fairly thick thorax. Right behind the wing a bit, come underneath, I'll wrap in front. And you'll see I've got a little bit of bare shank out the front. That's okay. It actually gives you a slightly smaller, as Florin has noted, a slightly smaller fly on a given gap of hook. Then for the hackle, I have a Grizzly hackle. It keeps in line with the sparkly nature of the tail and the light gray and black contrast. And this one, again, I'm going to strip some barbules off the end. So I have a bit of bare stem there. That's a little long, so I'm going to cut it a bit short. There we go. Once again, I put that on the near side of the wing, parallel to the hook shank. A couple of good wraps behind, a couple of good wraps down in front. Bring the thread, pull wing up, bring the thread in behind the wing and down on the far side. And again, at this point, I want to kink that feather so that it goes straight up. And this is where I start doing the wraps around the wing. And I'll get a couple of good wraps. And again, each time I tighten it, I want to hold the wing and the feather at the same time. When I get 4 or 5 wraps up on the stem up against the wing, I'll let the thread hang down on the far side again. And at this point, I'll pull the hackle down to give it that little kink and then start wrapping around the post. Again, around the post, over the eye, pull down, over the body, pull down, and that forces each subsequent wrap underneath the previous one. This is going much more smoothly than the last one because I got a good post. When I get my last wrap, I pull that down on the far side, take my thread, go around the post, over the eye, down again, 2, 3, and then let the thread hang. Turn my fly upside down, slide the scissors in on the bottom and snip that hackle out of the way. And then grab the whole schmear, pull out some thread, turn the hook so it's vertical. Don't let go of the bobbin. Grab my whip finisher, which fell on the floor. And again, wrap around the post, right up tight, underneath, and then over the eye, over the body, underneath, over the eye, over the body. And then when I finish, again, I'm finishing up with the whip finisher down, pushing away so that that loop goes to the back. And then when I suck it up, I won't catch any hackle fibers. Turn it upside down. I want to get in here and slide my scissors up the thread and saw against it. The last thing I'll do is put the fly back the way it should be, turn it upside down, and if there's any hackles that are sticking out below the body, I want to trim those off so it's nice and flat. The idea is that you want this part of the thorax of the fly to sit right in the surface film with the hackles supporting you on the top. So that's the turkey flat wing. And as you see, I like the post on that was a lot easier to tie than it was with the calf tail. Now, the last one is going to use a different post material. And it's this stuff here. It's called polywing or polypost. And it's just a thin skein of polyester yarn. For this one, I'm going to use a quill body. I don't know if you guys are familiar with using stripped quill for fly bodies. I'm also going to use a Klinkhammer hook, which is where these Klinkhammers are designed around parachute hackles. And a Klinkhammer hook is one that was invented by Hans van Klinken, Dutch guy. And he had partridge or made his first ones by taking a curved hook and then making the top part flat. And it's this flat part of the hook before it starts to curve where the wing is going to be tied. And the whole purpose of this is this is an emerger style fly, which means the bulk of the fly is actually below the surface film, and only the thorax and the hackle is above, is sitting on. I'm using a very fine thread because I want to keep the stuff on this hook fairly lightweight. I'm using a 10-aught thread. And I've discovered that my 10-aught thread, if I don't make sure to close up the gap on the eye of the hook, it'll get caught in there when I'm trying to do my whip finish. So I closed up the gap where the eye bends back, and I will come down here and cover that flat part of the hook, the Klinkhammer hook, with thread, and come back up. And again, it looks like it's about half of the shank. And I'm going to right to about where it bends straight down. Bring my thread back up and leave it at that halfway point on the shank. Now, for this guy, you're going to have to pardon me mumbling a bit because I'm going to take this stripped quill. It's basically a saddle type hackle, which all of the barbules have been stripped off. Probably, I don't know, they use bleach or something to strip it off. And I'm just going to wet it in my mouth to start with. So don't mind me being a little bit hard to understand, because I need to soften this up so that it will bend. The butt section particularly. The tail material is carpet fiber, tri-global nylon yarn called Zlon or Xlon or something like that. It has quite a glistening feature to it. So I've cut off a short piece, and that's too thick for the tail that I want. So I'm going to take about half of that off. Now what this represents is the trailing shuck on an emerging fly. I'm going to set that aside. So I've got my tail, and I've got my wing post material. These are all synthetics. So I'll take my wing post material, wrap it around the thread, bring it up, and cinch it down right on top of the hook. Yeah, come on, let's get it halfway. Top of the hook shank. Now I see it's split because I've divided it in half. So what I need to do now is do a few wraps. I can hold, because I've cut it long, I can hold that post up while I wrap my thread around it. And I'm going to, once I get it started, I can wrap this thread up the post. Come on. Oh, still. This is always the hard part, is getting this thread base up the post. And I have to keep supporting the bobbin weight as I do this. Now we're going. Now, because it's still divided, I need to take my bodkin in here and give it a little, separate these threads out so that they're not separated anymore. I can just slide it up to the materials to keep them from being too far apart. Now this should post a lot better now. You can see I'm trying to go a fair ways up this because this is softer than the turkey flat. I want to make sure I got a good solid thread post. So you see that's a good 1/16 of an inch up. So there we go. I'm just going to shorten that post a little bit. I can trim it to proper height later, but leaving it tall underneath really helps. Now, all the way down the hook shank. Because this is an emerger, it actually goes around the bend until you're almost horizontal. Take my Zelon, and I'm going to tie that in right there, right around the bend, and wrap up the tag there to form an underlay for the body. And it's okay if I leave that a little long. I'm going to cut it now, about shank length behind. There it is. That's the trailing shuck. Now I take my my quill, which I softened up with my mouth, and I'm going to lay that on the near side of the hook, about where the feather part of the strip quill starts, and tie it right snug at the back, wrap up the stem a little bit, and then trim the feather part off. So that's got just a quill stem at the very back. Bring my thread right up to behind the wing. And now I'll wrap the quill around the shank in touching turns, right up the shank of the hook. And this is very fine at the beginning, and it gets thicker and thicker. So it gives that tapered appearance to the body, but it's a really skinny body because the quill is not very fat. And it gives a really nice segmented appearance all the way up. And then of course, as you get to the thorax, the thickness of the quill gets wider. And when I get right up behind the wing, I'll pull it up and tie it off. Wrap a couple wraps in front, and then trim this off as tight to the shank as I can get. So far, so good. And I don't worry about it sticking out a bit, that little bit sticking out, that quill sticking out a bit, because I'm going to cover it up with some dark olive dubbing. And once again, I put it on fairly sparse. I'm going to put a fairly sparse thorax here of dubbing. Cover up where the quill ends. And build a bit of a thorax. It's not going to be quite as robust as the others because this is intended to be a much skinnier little mayfly. Just about finished with the dubbing here. But a little excess there. So there's my dub body. Dub thorax. I'm going to leave again the thread on the back side of where that wing is. And I have another grizzly hackle. And I will strip the stem back. So it's more than 1/8 of an inch, but not quite 1/4 of an inch. Have the orient the hackle so the intensely colored part faces me. Lay it on the side of the thorax. One over top, one in front. Don't tie the stem down. Take that thread in behind. Kink the feathers so that it goes straight up and go around the stem of the hackle and the post at the same time. Once again, I hold this nice and firm when I'm doing these wraps. You have to keep changing hands here. But you see, because I prepped that poly with a nice solid thread base, now it's going to hold that hackle up properly. Once again, pull the hackle down to give it that little kink, and then wrap around. And each subsequent wrap goes under the previous one. So when you get a good post, it's a lot easier. So about 4 wraps, pull it straight down, thread up over the eye and over the body. 2, 3. And this time I'm going to upside down the hook, come in here and right flat to the thorax, trim that off. A couple of hackle fibers sticking straight down I want rid of. Once again, take the whole hook out of the vise. This, because it's got a bent hook, you got to watch you don't over put it straight down to support the bobbin. And where did my whip finisher? There it is. Do my whip finish around the base of the hackle, over the eye, down the far side, over the eye, down the far side. 3 or 4 wraps is good. Again, push to the back and then suck it back up from the bottom. Slide your scissors down the thread and saw it, and I'll just put it horizontal again and check to make sure that there's nothing sticking down below the thorax. And that's him. Now, for this guy, I can probably trim some of this poly off the top. Just shorten the post up a bit. Make it a little more natural height. And that's it. So I can stop my spotlight now.
Nice. Nice job, Dave. Those are nicely tied.
Yeah, they're tricky flies but once you get the idea of getting a good solid post with getting the thread on the post enough wraps to make it so it doesn't wobble around, then it makes tying that hackle on a whole lot easier.
Yeah, I've never tried any of these, so I'll have to give it a shot.
Yeah, they're a pretty effective fly, particularly on slow water, because they're down in the surface film, and the hackle gives the impression of an emerging fly with its legs on the top and the hanging down. And they're pretty effective flies. I've pretty much stopped tying traditional hackle flies because they don't sit in the water the same way.
Yeah.
These ones sit right down in the film.
Dave, how do you fish it?
Cast a dry fly to current seams. Let it float, lots of slack, and be ready for a fish. Yeah, like these things will take a fairly, these Klinkhammer hooks will take a fairly light tippet because it's a light wire hook and it's not a very big eye, but they work pretty well.
I'll show you next week the easy way to do parachutes. the true beginner's guide.
There you go.
And then you can try the stuff that Dave showed today. I still don't tie them like he does, but I show you a different angle from a beginner's perspective.
Okay.
Anyway, we got 10 minutes left. So I better get a move on here.
Okay.
So back to sunken flies. And so here the thing is, I wanted to tie something on jig hooks, inspired by something that Dennis Gedney showed for Bottle Lake last year or 2 years ago. I think it's his Ray Wallace special. So that was the inspiration for this fly. Now here, the thing about jig hooks, so what you're seeing here on the device is a size 10 Daiichi 4640 heavy wire. Because of the way this hook is bent, you can only put a slotted bead on. So I'm trying to put on an 1/8 of an inch bead, and the only thing I can slide on here is a slotted bead. And then for regular beads, these other hooks, this is also a size 10, but this is a bit of a known name. It's also from Canadian Llama, and it's a size 10, but it's about 30% shorter in shank length. So if you like wide gap, short shank, this is the hook to go with. If you tie balance leeches, also this is a little bit easier to work with because you don't end up with excessively long bodies. Okay, so how does this fly go? Well, fairly straightforward. So use your standard woolly bugger thread, a 6/0 or 3/0, whatever, depending on the manufacturer. The one I'm using here is a Danville 3/0, which is like the Uni 6/0, at least according to the charts, and it does feel to the hand that way. And then for tail, I'm just going to use on this one, you can vary colors and materials. I'm just going to use some olive marabou. And because marabou is such a compressible material, I need a fair amount of it. I just strip from the feather until I end up with a thick enough clump. Now, again, tail length varies. Some people like longer tails. I don't like long tails the same way I didn't like to use long worms for fishing when I fished with worms. So I'm just going to cut this fairly short. Measure again. I don't want it to be too much longer than hook shank. So transfer, tighten up with a few wraps, and then just go over the fuzz that's left over. That's going to give a little bulk for the underbody. The other thing with these tails is to avoid fouling them in the hook, putting a few wraps right under the base of the tail helps to keep that tail out of trouble. Now I want to add a little bit of flash to the tail. So for the flash, again, you can use whatever you want. I find the crystal flash to be a little too shiny, so I'm using this, what's it called? A gunmetal flash in a tube. So you don't need much of this. Just take one strand from the clump and fold it a few times. So what I do is I fold it in two and then cut. And then I fold it again and then cut. And then this, now I have 4 strands and I want 4 strands of shiny stuff on either side of the hook. So I just loop it around the shank of the hook and carefully attach it. This way I get to attach both sides at the same time. And then while I still have this in my hand, I'm going to measure about tail length and trim at the back. I can always do a couple of extra tiding wraps if I feel the need for them. Go back under the tail for safety, another 2 or 3 wraps. That'll keep everything in place. Okay, now for the final and more interesting part, what I do is I take a strand of silver crystal flash. You can probably take other colors, whatever is worth experimenting with. And what I want to end up with, depending on your crystal flash, you may have to cut it in half or so. I want a strand of crystal flash that's going to be the same length as my Peacock Herl. I'm using here a full feather, and it's quite a nice tail feather. So these are fairly long, I'd say probably 8 inches or so. And I take 2 strands of this nice Peacock Herl and take these tips and just cut them off. So attach the Peacock right at the base of the tail. Attach the crystal flash as well. And now instead of doing a dubbing loop, so now I'm going to just move my thread forward. So I'm done. So now I have 2 strands of Peacock and 1 strand of the crystal flash. Then I take the hackle pliers, and rotary hackle pliers are the tool to use here, and grab all 3. So pull on them gently, not too hard, because the Peacock Herl is still a pretty fragile thing at this stage. And just twist the whole thing into a rope. This is going to reinforce your Peacock Herl and also put a little bit of flash in the center of it. Now the challenge, of course, is tying this on camera. The whole concoction is kind of long, and I have to be careful not to hit the camera, and even more importantly, not to hit whoops, not to hit the point of the hook, because I did it on the previous fly and it just promptly cut my Peacock Herl. It was not a pleasant experience. Okay, so if you don't do this with a camera, everything goes a lot faster because you don't have to worry about hitting so many things. So keep twisting. Whoops, see, it broke. So what happens is at this point, I just take the thread back, secure the Peacock Herl wherever it broke, reattach what's left, which is good enough. And then I'll have to trim whatever mess is left behind, but I can always leave that for the end. So now I'll go back to where I was, reattach my 3 strands together, 2 Peacock and 1 crystal flash, twist. Ugh. I'm having Dave's luck today. I guess I'll have to do this one more time. It's either I got 2 bad strands of Peacock or something happened here. I don't know what. Okay. There we go again. As the first fly, I break the Peacock twice. Okay. So keep going, and as usual with bead head flies, you have to do a bit of extra wrapping right behind the bead because there's always a little gap there. And whenever you're satisfied that you filled the body to the shape you wanted and there are no ugly gaps behind the bead, just trim all of this. And the fly is pretty much ready. All you have to do is a couple of whip finishes right behind the bead. 1 and 2. And that's the fly. It's relatively easy. A lot easier if you don't break the Peacock like I did. And this business of wrapping together with a crystal flash gives you a little bit of extra sparkle in the Peacock. And when this gets wet, that sparkle becomes even more visible. So this would be, I think, an alternative to ribbing with wire, which I also did on some of these earlier versions of the fly. I guess you can see them here. There are some right in the background here. There are some ribbed with wire. So if you don't like that particular look, you can try this of putting it in the Herl. And you know, you can play with different colors, different kinds of materials here. It's just a general idea of somewhere between a leech and a woolly bugger, basically. And I'm going to stop right